So I want to start with you, Nina, and we'll get to a few tweets in a moment. But could you just sort of generally tell us, in your opinion, what makes a brand likable on Twitter?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as part of my role at Twitter, I have the great opportunity of meeting with brands and helping them optimize their strategy on the platform. And actually what we work with them on is less about likability, because I think that can be really relative for each brand, but more about how do you find an authentic relevance that connects with the audience that you're looking to have a conversation with. So what's special about Twitter is the fact that you're able to have conversations between anyone, right? Like anyone can go out and talk to celebrities, brands, sports leagues, et cetera, and we see those conversations happening every single day. And that presents a really great opportunity for a brand to authentically connect with the consumers that they care about. And I think the key is really finding what are those consumers tweeting about, what are some of the ways that they tweet, my specific audience group that I care about, and how can I start to emulate that in a really kind of authentic and human way. There's a couple brands that I think do that really well, but the key is really to land that voice in an authentic way.
Okay. Let's look at a couple tweets that we talked about before. This was one that you like. It's from Heinz Ketchup. What do you like about this one? I assume it's not that you enjoy mayo chup.
No, I think what's great about this is like the Heinz company really isn't somebody who is going to maybe follow a traditional approach to conversation, or they might not follow, let's say, the Wendy's approach to having banter back and forth. For them, the opportunity on Twitter is to actually start to think of Twitter as a focus group. So this was an opportunity to connect with their audience and actually bring them into the product production opportunity. So they looked at Twitter as an interactivity place, a place to understand, hey, we recognize this conversation about condiments is happening, and we want to pull you into everything that we're thinking about from a brand. So a really unique way, I think, to start conversations is to think about how to create that interactivity and do so in a way that actually impacts their business objectives, right? Like we can all go out to a store today and buy mayo chup, and it was all kind of tied back to this consumer-powered tweet and strategy that they put together.
All right, let's look at one more.
Yeah.
This was T-Mobile responding to a story in The Verge. What did you like about this one?
Well, I think what's funny about this, and the question I get asked a lot, is if I want to have an authentic voice on Twitter, do I have to be funny? And I think the key is really leaning into whatever brand persona you've developed. So T-Mobile has done a really great job of establishing themselves across all of their marketing and communications as a challenger brand. They're somebody, that's kind of the messaging that you expect from them. So once this message came out about one of their competitors kind of faking their 5G capabilities, then they were able to respond in a way that felt really authentic to their broader communication strategy. And I think thinking about your brand voice on Twitter, starting from that place of authenticity and alignment with who you are in your broader communications really sets up a tweet like this for success.
All right, we're going to get back to you and talk about the @Twitter account in a little while, but Dooley wanted to talk about MoonPie. Obviously, MoonPie, everybody knows, is one of the great voices on Twitter. This tweet, lol, okay, five letters, 500,000 likes. One of the big sort of bizarre success stories in social. Could you sort of tell us about how you sort of went about building the brand voice for MoonPie?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to what we talked about. You've got to find a voice that's appropriate for the brand. And MoonPie is obviously a pretty cool product because it's a snack cake. And if you're not having fun with snack cakes on social media, you're definitely doing something wrong. But at the same time, they're a 100-year-old family-owned, very traditional, very conservative CPG company. And when we kind of took them through sort of the whole strategy process on social, we landed on a platform called Out of This World. And that basically kind of worked on two levels. It was sort of a mnemonics play where we got to own outer space, and it gave us permission to talk about things like the solar eclipse. But also, they had a business challenge where it was a really popular brand with older consumers. But when you look at their household penetration data, it really dropped off with millennials. So the business challenge was, how do we recruit in a new generation of users into the MoonPie franchise? And of course, millennials hate bad traditional CPG advertising. So we kind of had this juxtaposition where we wanted to have a unique, ownable, wholesome family voice, but we also wanted to speak in a millennial voice. And that's kind of where we landed with this out of this world, sort of personifying a snack cake to where millennials can really relate to it. And occasionally, a competitor will step in it, and you get a good real-time opportunity. And by the way, everybody in the room, I'm sure, regardless of the brand that you work on, you've got content pillars. But we, as an agency, we think about real-time as being the most important content pillar. And so we had run a whole national campaign about moon pie being the official snack cake of the solar eclipse. And moon pie had record-breaking sales in that month in August 2017, kind of leading up to the eclipse. And then in our listening tool, we saw Hostess jump in and say, we're the official snack cake of the solar eclipse. So it was sort of like a double opportunity. We're like, oh, no, you don't. I mean, on the one hand, we ran this campaign. On the other hand, our name is Moon Pie. And since we kind of speak in the first person, we kind of wrote the tweet almost the way you would text a friend back if they said something crazy, and hence LOL, okay, and the rest is history there.
Oh, no, you don't would have worked quite as well.
Say that again?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh no, you don't wouldn't probably have worked quite as
Probably would not have worked as well.
Yeah. So this is really a question for everybody. Being conversational and acting like people on Twitter and in social generally is such a big thing now, but you kind of have to do it right. What are some pitfalls of that, and why do you think it connects when it does connect so well?
Well, I think that it's almost common use now. I mean, if you went back a couple of years ago, sort of breaking down the fourth wall on Twitter, it was really edgy for a brand to talk in the first person, and Wendy's was very well known for it. But I think one of the people on the panel was really one of the first people to do it, and he actually did it for an agency brand. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was really sort of accidental. It felt. I was the only person tweeting for the company, and still am, and so it just felt odd to do like a royal we kind of thing. And so I think I was lucky in that I started tweeting for RGA at a time when no one was really paying attention, either outside or within the agency. And so I was able to kind of stumble around and experiment and hit on something that worked and shed the things that didn't work, and I think one of those was the first person thing. Mm-hmm. But to answer your question, I think it's a balancing act of you can never forget that you're tweeting on behalf of a company and a brand, because there are occasions when you really want to reply just as yourself. And that's where I think you can get into trouble. And the times that I've there've been mercifully very few, but times when I've gotten into trouble is when I forget that. Mm-hmm.
I want to look at a couple more Moon Pie tweets before we move on to Kate. This was when the government shut down and NASA and Moon said they couldn't reply, so Moon Pie sort of stepped in very generously.
Yeah, if I could add a comment about that, I think everybody does social listening, and I think a mistake a lot of brands do is that, going back to that NASA quote, we're going to show that one. We'll talk about Okay Baby.
We can talk about, let's go back.
Yeah, on NASA, kind of the backstory on this one is a lot of brands do social listening just for their brand or just for their competitor, but a trick that we found that works really good is to listen for adjacent terms. And because our strategy for Moon Pie is out of this world, we've got social listening turned on for NASA, outer space, moon, and anytime there's kind of an interesting tweet or story about that, that gives us a real-time opportunity to jump in. And
I think what's great about that too is we know Twitter is like what's happening, right? And it's not just what's happening within the world of your brand. So the more that a brand can find, again, like that opportunity to be relevant, based on what consumers are seeing, based on the tweets that they're seeing, the topics that are trending, if they can do so in a way that doesn't feel forced, but it feels really true and authentic to themselves, that's to me when you kind of hit that Twitter gold, and I think this tweet does it so well.
Thank you, and I couldn't agree more. I think it's easier for a consumer to relate to a real-time topic when it gets outside of the brand and a competitor.
All right, I think I've aged out of the demographic that would understand what the hell is going on. in this
So
tweet, but yeah, Dooley, tell us what this tweet's all about.
So I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, sometimes you just get lightning in a bottle. When we did this one, we did not know that it was going to go viral. And I think Mashable actually rated this the #1 tweet of last year, which was kind of cool. But literally, this was a DM that we got from a consumer, and that was their profile image. And were they joking when they reached out to us? We don't know, but it said, the moon pie should contain more fiber, in my opinion. And then we all died laughing, looking at the image. And so you can almost think there's Picasso's blue period. This comes from the OK series of moon pie. So, you know, we do well on OK tweets.
I mean,
Very
that's
Picasso-esque, yeah.
when people come at you, you know, like the profile pic, the bio, you start looking at some of their tweets, and like usually, you know, there's material in there that presents itself to respond.
And we try to be very nice when we do a burn, and I wouldn't even call this one a burn. I would call it a, you know, New Yorker magazine, very subtle burn, you know, because Wendy's owns that. And you know, generally we don't think for a brand burning is a viable strategy, but occasionally if people come after you, to your point, you can punch back a little bit.
There's usually something there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Kate, let's talk about Nat Geo. Obviously, you guys have such an enormous social footprint. I mean, you've got over 100 million Instagram followers now. You've got a huge audience on Twitter, also on Facebook, and we'll talk about sort of your Reddit strategy a bit later. But could you tell us, is there an overarching strategy for how you engage in social that you then deploy differently across each platform?
Yeah, I think for us, you know, what we always keep in mind, regardless of the platform that we're on, whether it's Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, is kind of staying true to our brand, really being authentic to who we are as storytellers and to, you know, how we can contribute to conversations. I loved what you said about kind of your listening and being expanded not just to the terms of what your products are, and we kind of approach that too. What I love are when we're able to authentically integrate our brand, our content, our stories into conversations that are already happening. And that's something that we try to apply across every platform that we have a presence on.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's start with Twitter. Here's a tweet thread that you guys did for Nat Geo Travel. What's interesting to me is this is tied to a content calendar, obviously. It's National Haiku Day. It also, I believe, was tied to Nat Geo Travel's cities issue. So I'm curious, how much do you guys rely on the content calendar, and also how much do you use social to push your other platforms like magazines and TV?
Yeah, so we're on these platforms not just to be pushing out our content, but also, you know, keeping in mind that we're here to have a conversation. These are people that are on these platforms, so we want to be sure to be relevant in that conversation. Our audience on travel particularly is really creative, so they're constantly always just sharing poems or phrases like describing their imagery to us all the time. So we had kind of planned this out to leverage something that was being talked about, National Haiku Day, and to tie that into the release of our cities issue, where we had a bunch of different pieces on different cities around the world. So we asked our community to create a haiku of their favorite city. We would try to guess the city, and then we were able to integrate pieces of our content into our guesses. If we got it right, if we got it wrong, and just kind of distribute our content through that way.
Okay.
I just want to, I love this because it's also, we see so much content coming from especially travel brands that are like, here's a city guide with a link to the city. Like, so this to me, I feel like just helps you stand out, and it also helps you connect to the audience and really give the audience more of what they're looking at. And I think when we see brands like succeed on Twitter and other platforms, it's because you start with that audience, right? And you think about like, what are the people actually looking for and what do they want from a brand versus just kind of pushing our marketing calendars at them.
Exactly. Like, we know cities makes a lot of sense for travel, and we're like, National Haiku Day, how would we ever make, you know, our brand be relevant to that conversation? And this felt like a natural way to do that and not be forceful in the conversation.
Chapin, let's talk about @RGA, which I think is really special in a way because you've been the voice of it for about 10 years, and I think that consistency is pretty unusual. And I think it's probably the most followed ad agency handle out there. I think your secret is probably that you cover a lot of Game of Thrones.
What? I'm sorry, repeat that. What did you say?
You cover a lot of, you're not afraid to cover Game of Thrones like so many others.
You know, I don't even watch Game of Thrones, but it was, you know, I mean, this image, I mean, this very quickly became a meme, and it's one of those things where it's like, there are those things where it's just like, all right, I have to, you have to, it's obligatory. Like, you have to do something with it. And I think this is interesting just because it's exemplary in that, like, the things that do best for RGA are things where it's not just RGA commenting on culture, it's an intersection of like culture and a truth about our business, or a truth that a lot of the people who follow RGA, resonates with them. So, the word storyteller is, it's just very loaded in our business, and everyone likes to call themselves a storyteller, and it's bullshit, and, so.
Right.
It's a trigger word.
It is, it's triggering, very much.
Now, I'm curious where we talked a little bit about this already, but what is the voice of RGA? Is it your voice? Is it an exaggerated version of you? What is it exactly?
Heightened reality. It is, it's very much me, I guess filtered through a lens of our business, and I think it's very different from how RGA talks about itself generally, but we do, like, when I think about our brand, like, we like to think of ourselves as like iconoclastic and sort of people who like buck conventional wisdom, and we do things differently. We have our own model. I think in that sense it sort of fits with our brand. But it's very much me. It's not like a character. Like I believe in everything. I stand by everything I tweet. And I think a lot of the truth is, a lot of the things I post from RGA could very easily be on my personal account.
I know you're not afraid to sort of poke a little fun at the industry. There's one of your famous tweets from last year. RGA is an IPG agency, so you're certainly having fun with the mothership and
yes.
the industry generally. Could you talk about this tweet a little bit?
Yeah, I think this is another one where it's like it's that intersection of it's commenting on current events. There are a lot of mergers and acquisitions going on, and a lot of them, it seemed that they were just sort of, they weren't terribly creative with the naming. It was just sort of like.
I bet if we did a quick Google search, that might correspond with a certain extremely long name of two agencies.
That may already be taken. I don't know. Some may have, like,
I think this was VML YNR, perhaps, right?
But it's again, like, just speaks to a truth of sort of what everyone in our business is thinking about and talking about. And
yeah, Nina, you're in an interesting position because not only do you advise a lot of brands, but you also have @Twitter, which has 56 million, I think, followers.
Yeah.
And you guys have evolved that brand voice over the years. So I'm curious your take on kind of what is the @Twitter brand voice. It seems to be getting kind of MoonPie-esque maybe here and there.
Yeah.
And what you've learned in developing that voice that's helpful to you in advising other brands about their voice.
Yeah, I think I'll start with, I think the great part about a brand voice on a platform like Twitter is it's the chance to take whatever that brand persona is, and so many brands have these, like if RGA is the iconoclast and the rebel in some ways, like it's a chance to really bring that to life and to bring that personality to life. So earlier last year, we spent a lot of time really trying to understand, like, what is Twitter? I think we had a really strong internal corporate culture, but we were like, how do we bring that to life? How do we talk about what makes our platform unique and special? And what we realized was we have a platform that powers so many of these great conversations. Our role as Twitter is to try to make those conversations happen, encourage those conversations, and kind of stimulate them with a tweet like this, which is like you up and you just get a ton of replies and a lot of fun that people have with it. So the goal has really been, how do we stimulate reactions? How do we get people replying? How do we generate as many conversations as we can? And I think we've also tried to tap into, I would say, like, similar to what we're trying to do with MoonPie and even Chapin to some extent, like just this light conversational nature of Twitter and how it's kind of a reaction on different trends, different conversational styles that we're seeing out in the world, and everybody has their own kind of unique way in to provide that commentary. So that's a lot of what we try to do, and what we're proud of is the fact that switching to a more kind of conversational voice has really led to a huge surge in the number of replies that we're seeing. So 14x increase over the past year, which again feeds our goal of just driving more conversation. I think there's one thing that's really important about our voice, and it hasn't come up yet, so I'd be curious to hear what everybody else has to say, but it's the fact that we think about brand voice, even with the @Twitter handle, as a spectrum, and I think that's really important for brands to think about how does your voice flex across a variety of messages. So this is a fun, playful tweet that was sent at 12:01 a.m., so has a lot of different layers to it. But we want our voice to be able to also extend to things like product updates or different company messages that we need to push out. And to me, it's critical that brands are able to speak seamlessly and be a single source of truth, so that it doesn't feel like you're very authentically having fun conversations over here, but when it comes to pushing out a marketing message or delivering a company update, it sounds like it's coming from a totally different person. So our goal is consistently, how do we make sure that the voice we use for You Up is the same that we would use for, say, launching Twitter Lite in a number of new countries. So that's been a very important focus for us, and I think that's critical for all brands who are thinking about what their brand voice strategy is. This just kind of gives another sense of like how much our voice has been able to flex to different situations. And as we think about the @Twitter voice being kind of that source of reactions on the platform, a very simple wow captures what's happening in Times Square. It captures, it's something that consumers can go back to use in a variety of situations. So again, it's just kind of continuing to power that dialogue in a really big way.
Do you guys feel like you have multiple voices that you go to in different situations in social?
Yeah, absolutely. And we think about it not only as just kind of a range of voices on one channel, but I think where it really comes in as different platforms. So if you look at MoonPie, it's all a dotted line back to the strategy of Out of This World, but we talk a little bit differently on Facebook than we do on Instagram versus Twitter, and you can really kind of break it out by platform that way.
Yeah, we have a very similar approach. Like how we communicate on Reddit is definitely different than what we're saying and what we're sharing on Twitter.
Nina, I would just add to what you were saying, like that's one thing I think I don't always do particularly well. Like I don't, there's certain things that like I just have to post that are like like RGA things, and sometimes I'm able to sort of filter it through my voice, but other times it's just, and
It's hard.
It is hard, and yeah. Anyway,
It's also nice to be able to sort of like retweet RJ Ventures or something like that, where you don't necessarily have to put it in your own voice, right?
Right.
I mean, we do that at Clio a little bit with Muse. Yeah. We retweet Muse a bit from the Clio account, things like that.
I've seen you do some good things, like my obligatory company tweet or something like that, which still feels like you.
And like people who, I'll get called out for that. People will be like, oh, obviously this is one. Like people laugh at me because it's like, oh, you had to do this one. And anyway.
Dooley, I wanted to ask you about another MoonPie thing that you did for the Super Bowl the last couple of years. I know in 2018 for the Super Bowl, you guys came up with some pretty amusing scripts for commercials that you would have made for the Super Bowl if you had the money, which you didn't. And you never even actually made the spots for well, this year, you took the scripts from last year and actually made the videos. Could you sort of talk about how important it is to not just comment on internet culture and as it goes by, as it kind of drifts by in social, but also make things like this for social and give your followers some extra value?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's even more important to do this kind of thing now than it was a couple of years ago, because consumers' attention spans are shrinking, and we want to remain relevant and continue to grow our audience and not lose followers and drop off. And if you go to the well too many times with the exact same kind of tweets, we see that engagement can drop off, fans can fall out, and so really what we kind of like to do sometimes is surprise and delight, and sometimes you can do that by hijacking culture, sometimes you can do it with real time, but sometimes you can do it with more just highly creative content that's tied to an event that isn't real time per se, because everybody knows the Super Bowl's coming up, so this is planned ahead of time, but it wasn't just a regular tweet. And kind of the fun on this one was when we tweeted these 9 bizarre scripts in a very Moon Pie-esque fashion, last year, we never actually planned to make the commercials. So we didn't realize that this was going to be such a big hit, but because the community loved it so much, we sat there after the fact and it was like, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be fun to make these? And a lot of the creatives on the account were telling me, they were like, oh, we can't do that. Like, these aren't real scripts. They weren't made to be made. And so that's why it's like layers of meta on top of meta on top of meta, where we're a CPG brand that was mocking bad packaged good commercials. So we made fake commercials, but then consumers liked the fake commercials, so then we made it. So try to figure that one out, but it worked.
Worth seeking out that spot on Twitter as well. It's pretty funny. Kate, can we talk about your Reddit strategy? I know you guys have engaged a lot in that community. Could you tell us sort of why you want to engage with people on Reddit and how you go about doing that?
Yeah, so when we first kind of considered launching a presence on Reddit about 1.5 years ago, it was really because we saw that our content was organically being shared there. It really hadn't been a place where brands could interject in the conversation in an authentic way. When they rolled out their brand pages, we decided to kind of lean in and experiment. So we picked a couple of select subreddits where it really made sense for National Geographic to contribute to the conversation, science, history, conservation areas. And we would introduce experts and kind of host these AMAs, so giving the super fans a chance to speak to people that they're already following their work and they wouldn't have otherwise had this chance. For us, it was about reaching this audience who could care about our content and this audience that we didn't really see anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, Instagram is also huge for you guys. Can you talk a little bit about how you go to market in Instagram? And I mean, you've got 100 and however million it is now followers there. Obviously, National Geographic has such a wonderful history in photography. It gives you a head start visually, but tell us what your strategy is there.
Yeah, I think what's special about Instagram for us is that when we launched and to now, our strategy's it's evolved obviously as new features have become available with stories and IGTV and all of that, but it's been pretty consistent in that for us, it's always been a place to show our photographers' work. The words that you're reading are from our photographers themselves, telling their stories, and that's been consistent over the years.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Chapin, one more question for you quickly. Do you feel like, what does the RGA Twitter really do for the company?
What does it do for the company?
Yeah, what's the effect on business? Is it a new business tool in any way, or is it just a way to sort of be present? I think
it's important as a recruiting tool. I think RGA is followed by a lot of students and ad students and people who are looking for jobs in the industry. And so I think it helps, warm us up a little bit for people who are looking around at different options. I've sort of heard anecdotally, I don't think RGA is reeling in business on the strength of my tweets, but I do think I have heard anecdotally, and clients have told me, that it definitely, it's like a conversation starter, I think, and I think it signals to potential clients that we get these channels, we understand, we know how to develop a voice and develop an audience.
Mm-hmm. This is kind of a question for all of you, and I'm going to skip ahead a couple slides because I would like to have time for a Q&A. This one. What kind of brand posts do you guys enjoy and do you would like to see more of, and what kind of brand posts are you kind of tired of, or you feel like that's kind of run its course? And Nina, I believe you sent me this Chipotle one. And actually, this has been Photoshopped. It's actually about 5 times as long as that.
It is. Yeah, so Chipotle, for background, had fun with the 280 character. So instead of actually filling it with text, they just filled it with white space. So for me, as I was going through my feed, it was like a very kind of arresting moment. It really captured my attention because I thought Twitter broke, because for a while my screen was just fully blank. So what I liked about this was they were able to really get innovative and creative with something like 280 characters, whereas, you know, when we first announced it at the end of 2017, others were kind of starting to write longer novels. So this is a really recent tweet. I thought it was a really kind of creative use of the platform. I think one thing we always talk to brands about is how do you make sure you're choosing the right memes or the right moments, trending topics, innovations to jump into? What does it feel, how does it feel authentic to you? In this example, I saw a couple other brands play with the idea of space. Target did it as well. And I think that's a really great kind of innovative technique, but you don't want to see everybody doing it. So being really cautious about what is my voice, what makes sense for my audience, what would be relevant to them, what's appropriate for them, helps you kind of be able to guide, am I going to jump into that Game of Thrones meme or not? Because when it starts to be overdone, then I think it starts to lose its effectiveness, and your brand kind of starts to get watered down. So I thought this was a great example of it. We've all heard of a number of fails that different brands have had where they've tried unsuccessfully to kind of jump into memes and trends. There was one this week from a financial institution, and unfortunately, when it falls flat, the audience kind of calls. No, I don't know either. But the audience really calls it out and really kind of recognizes that, like, hey, this is a fail, and that can actually do significant harm to the brand. So it's important to know who you are, know what's authentic and relevant to you, and be able to kind of apply that to various situations and almost a decision tree as you're thinking about how to manage your brand voice. That's my point of view.
Anything that you guys have been noticing in the brand world that you've been liking or not liking?
Well, I think there's a trend that's about to start, and that is what I'd call the celebrification of, that's a made-up word, I think, of kind of brand content creators. And if you think about it, I mean, YouTubers are celebrities. You know, obviously there's a ton of influencers that are celebrities on Instagram, and we're starting to see brands start to hire famous content creators to run their channel. I want to say Slim Jim is doing that right now on Instagram, although I don't know that they're calling it out like RGA does with Chapin. But I think that, you know, kind of where culture could be heading kind of on brand Twitter right now could be almost hiring big time free, it's almost like the NFL, you bring in free agents to run your Twitter. And what we've done as an agency, we're kind of like way early on that. We've hired a couple of people because we found it's very hard to hire traditional creative people or social people that are kind of right on the bleeding edge. So what we've started to do is find young creatives that have personal Twitter accounts that have gone viral, and then we're hiring them and getting them to run brand accounts. But I think that could be a hot trend.
Okay. We got about 7 minutes. I'd love to take some questions from the audience if anybody would. There's a microphone right here. If you guys want to come up and ask a question.
I'm Hannah. Thank you so much for coming. This question is specifically for Kate. So Nat Geo is a really interesting brand compared to some of the other brands we've heard from over this session, or over the last couple of days, mostly because your product is actually your content, whether it's your magazine, your television show. So from a social media perspective, what portion of your social media content is your true IP, whether it's a clip from your TV show, an article from your magazine, versus something that's not directly your content? An example being the haiku tweet that you showed earlier.
Yeah, I mean, our social, a big portion of our strategy is to support our content. That's what we're marketing. So it's pretty evenly split between, you know, keeping your platforms and your channels healthy with engagement activations like that haiku thing, but also finding ways to tie that back to our content. So, you know, whether that be like we have a watch party because we're leaning into the final episode of Hostile Planet, and we have a bunch of like conservationists or nature journalists come in and answer questions to get you ready for the last episode. We're leveraging elements of the show to have that conversation, but want to also make sure that there's a unique value add there for anybody who maybe hasn't seen the show yet and might be wanting, this might be their first introduction to it.
Thank you.
Hi. We're seeing how Instagram is testing out, removing likes from their posts. Jack Dorsey has talked about how, if he wanted to reinvent Twitter, he might take out likes. Now you have retweets, you have replies, so you still see that level of engagement. But are there any, if this continues to be a trend, do you think that there are any changes that you might, or have advice for social media marketers about the type of content that they're posting?
I'll jump in on that one. Yeah, I think the most important thing that a lot of marketers don't realize on social media is at the end of the day, you want reach. And so if the platforms end up taking likes away, it's really going to kind of put the spotlight where it should be anyway, which is on retweets and shares, because that's what increases the reach for a brand. And at the end of the day, you want more eyeballs and more impressions. And so I think when you think about content strategy moving forward, if the platforms do that, you're going to have to rethink what kind of content is going to get the most shares. But again, I would argue content calendars should probably be kind of done that way right now. Love to hear what everybody else thinks about that.
This is I have to say I'm very troubled by this because my entire sense of self-worth comes from likes. The heart, when I pick up my phone in the morning and the hearts aren't there, it's very bad, so.
But you know what's funny about that? I question if the platforms will really take it away from that reason, because there's a lot of scientific research that says you get a serotonin hit, and it's literally like using drugs to see those likes. I don't think that'll be smart for the platforms to take that away.
And I'll just add, I think when we zoom out, it's, even though we've spent a lot of time saying, oh, this tweet got a lot of likes, or this post got a lot of likes, I think it's really about changing the perception of brands, right? Like, that's what we're all here to do. So by having a more human voice is actually just aimed to create a more authentic dialogue with consumers. And I think we're actually seeing that voice shift into marketing strategies too, so that as people are creating video content or more traditional marketing campaigns, it's meant to align with this voice where the goals actually are less, the likes are great, but it's about getting reach for that content. It's about changing the perception of your brand and more of those brand metrics. So I wonder if it's also, we need to start shifting the conversation away from how did this individual tweet do, to how is the broader perception of RGA changing, MoonPie changing, Nat Geo changing, et cetera, and are our efforts helping that?
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Tricia, and I'm a film and TV and digital media professor. I have a question for Nina. So earlier you had said that Twitter's MO is about increasing user engagement and having more conversations happen on the platform. But given that polarizing and inflammatory content is really good at generating engagement and conversations, I'm just wondering if Twitter's got a strategy that you are looking to implement, or one that's already been in place, to try to tone down the sort of the toxic culture that Twitter can produce for users.
Yeah, over the past year, health of the conversation on Twitter has been a huge focus for our organization, and about how can we make sure that kind of the outliers that sit on any edge case of that conversation start to go away, so that it's easier to report that and that consumers feel safer having those conversations. So we talked a lot today about some of the more, I would say, lighthearted and fun conversations that happen on the platform, but it's a huge focus for us to make sure that every user on Twitter feels really safe to participate in those conversations. And there's a ton of efforts that we're doing there. We just recently wrote a huge blog post that outlines some of those efforts that has more details as well.
Hi, I'm Kenzie. Nina, I have a question about some of the popular accounts, like We Rate Dogs. I don't know if people know what that is, but one of my favorite accounts. And I know he was just a college student that decided it would be fun to rate dogs. So do you invite those kind of people in to kind of help them with their strategy, or people that go viral like that? What's your game plan?
Yeah, so that's completely them. I would say it's amazing how creative people can be and how much people can kind of tap into what makes them happy and what they feel like makes people around them happy. What I think is really smart about those accounts is they look at what are people tweeting about, what are some of the topics that people care about, and obviously cute animal photos are just absolutely the best things that you can get on the internet. So being able to kind of tap into that human insight then creates a really great opportunity. And then the platform just kind of goes to work, and it's great to see kind of a huge fandom build up on it. And there's some great opportunities, I think, for brands to also jump into that. We Rate Dogs also did this great promotion with Dumbo recently, of where they were trying to create synergies between like elephants with the big ears and how do we rate the elephants, and it was really cute. So again, it's an authentic kind of very human-based approach, which I think is fantastic.
I think we can do one more question.
Hi, my name's Holly. I was just wondering, when you're building a brand voice, what specific exercises do you go through to ensure that consistency across like the more fun parts, maybe B2C to B2B, more serious?
So the brands that I work with, we start with what is your brand persona, right? Like, why do you exist? What's your brand purpose? What are some of the personality traits that you've created, not just for social, but at a macro? Because I think you need to start there in order to have an authentic foundation. And then, we do a series of workshops and exercises to start to flesh that out. Well, how would they talk? Is there a celebrity they talk like? What words would they use? What emojis would they use? Like, just starting to kind of break down what the language and lexicon would look like. That's how we advise, but you guys do it every day.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, thinking about the big trend that we've talked about earlier today was sort of the personification of brands on Twitter. It goes back to what you just said. If you thought about it as a person, what would all the traits of that person be? What would their voice be? And then the key is just tying all of that back into the equity for that brand so that it's authentic.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I think I'm an anomaly in that like I haven't done any exercises it's sort of developed organically, and it's as far as like the taste and sort of choices, it's pretty much just me. So, which is like good for consistency and sort of a sharpness of the voice. Not so good if like I get hit by a bus when I walk out of here, and like then what does what does the agency do? There's not, I mean, there are benefits to having a team. So, yeah.
The other thing I would say too is, it's not like making a TV spot where you've got to go spend $1 million and you better do all your planning and testing on the front end, and then once you've got the spot, that's the spot. And so you can test and learn in social, and we've talked earlier, Ken, on the panel about having a range with the voice. And whether you're in-house at a brand or working with a client, you can do this whole rigorous voice exercise. But at the end of the day, test the full range there and then let the engagement kind of drive it after the fact. And the voice can modify once it goes out there, kind of like Jacob was saying.
Too, like where you start and where you end. Like when we started, a lot of our different brand channels, it all evolved from this brand of National Geographic. But as it's evolved, the way that we communicate when we're speaking to on Nat Geo Travel is very different than what we're doing on the main Nat Geo channel. They're completely different, and that was all based on the data and the responses that we were seeing.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, everybody. Before we go, I just wanted to shamelessly promote my Clio website, which is called Muse by Clio. Would love to have you guys come visit. I think we're covering creativity in kind of a fun way. And please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists.